just do what your passion drives you to do. The first bit of advice, of course, is like I've said, make sure that you're actually entering into a path that is going to provide a solution to a problem. That's the first thing. Second thing is make sure that you have the time, talent, and treasure, as I call it, to enter that journey. And then just engage with the best people that you can to make sure that what you're doing resonates not only with other people who use values you respect, but also with the market you're looking to approach.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7 and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Paul Barron. And Paul got a math degree in college, and during college also strung tennis rackets as a way to earn an additional income. Graduated from college, and with the mathematics degree, and taught for a period of time, as well as opened up a tennis shop. Got a master's degree as well. And then while he was teaching in high school, they wanted him to choose between teaching and tennis shops. And so he decided tennis shops was the way to go. And so did that full time and opened up 3 additional shops, then sold them to his partner. Got invited to do sales position for a business run by a family member for a period of time. And then went through a few other businesses before doing his own business. And then as he was working with somebody, he typically reached out to reached a point of wanting to go back and work for himself after doing a few things with other people, such as restaurants, software development, and telephone and data systems and that. So figured out he liked the sales and marketing aspects and hats. And so he originally got hired for a Russian tech company to introduce technology into the US. Did that for a period of time, and then semi-retired before finally getting back to doing his own business, which is founded a business that does vertical printing images on walls. So with that much as an introduction and hopefully mostly accurate, welcome on the podcast, Paul.
Thanks very much, Devin. Nice to be here. And yes, mostly accurate. I will clarify for legitimacy and accuracy that I have a master's education, not a master's degree, because that fell into my transition out of the teaching world into the business world. And I was on my way to completing all my coursework and never took the comps because I was too wrapped up in the world of retail and starting my own businesses. That I never
Before we get too far into correcting it, we'll correct that. What do we get to? Why don't we take us back a bit in time to where the journey began, which was with the coming out of the degree from college in mathematics, right?
Yeah, so I always wanted to be a math teacher. I like mathematics. Math is everywhere. It's in all of our lives. I don't care whether you're into music or business or whatever have you. I always enjoyed the logical reasoning that surrounded mathematics, and I was very good at it. So that was a logical path for me to take. And this was during the 60s and 70s. And so it was also a path to avoid being drafted into the war at the time. And so I opted to be a teacher, which was an exemption for a while. And then at that point, I really enjoyed teaching. Probably would be a teacher right through till today, if it wasn't for the fact that I love the students and I love the teaching, but I didn't like the administrative and the parents and everything else that you had to deal with as a teacher. Besides just strictly the students and the educational process. So with that said, I did have a foot in the door during college, earning some extra income. I was a tennis player. I still am. The package isn't as nice as it was back then, but I'm still pretty good, and I play regularly and competitively. And so that was my sports release from at school time. And I strung tennis rackets for the athletic department at the school, and did very well with that for my spending money, but I enjoyed it also from a business aspect. And so I started a business with a friend right out of college while I was also teaching. and grew that business, as you mentioned accurately, to 3 shops up in upstate New York, where my shop was, uh, and that was very successful. I didn't exit because I got to the point
One,
in that.
maybe before you get to the Exodus, one question that I thought was interesting that you mentioned. So you were doing basically full-time teaching, and then you had the shop was a second, or a side hustle, and most of the time those seem like they're second full-time jobs. But as you're doing that, one of the things you mentioned is you kind of got to a point where the school had come and said you either have to choose us or the tennis shop, and you decided to do the tennis shop. So how did you, first of all, why did what motivated them to, or make you choose one, or between one or the other, and what made you decide to go with the tennis shop?
Well, like I said, I like to think I was a good teacher, and I enjoyed doing that, and I think they liked me. And it was my tenure year, third year teaching. You got tenure in this high school system, and so they offered me tenure if I would give up the responsibilities of the tennis shop, and that was basically because they saw in the last year or so of that period that I was devoting a lot of time to the growth of those stores, and I was absent quite a bit from school. Teachers do get a lot of time off, not only for the vacations that are afforded to the students and teachers, but just generally by being employed by somebody. You have sick days, you have other vacation days, and I was taking full advantage of that, as opposed to many teachers who never take a day off for years. Me, I always kind of enjoyed the work-life balance, which is also another separation between having your own business, provided it's successful and you can take some work-life balance, as opposed to working for somebody where you're dictated, your hours and your time is really dictated by responsibilities, not only to the business, but to others on your teams and everything else that goes on in the normal work matrix society of a work environment. In a company structure. So yeah, so in my third year, I was offered tenure. They said, choose A or B. Do you want to go into business, Paul, or do you want to teach? And I really enjoyed business. And I enjoyed the aspect of growing the business. I enjoyed all the from the financial to the marketing to the customer relationships, engagement, identifying markets, customers, vendors, suppliers, all of the aspects of the retail business really hit with me. And I enjoyed most of it. And when I say most of it, is that was the start of my entrepreneurial journey. And as things progressed, as I went from there to working for somebody to then starting another business, I was in the food service restaurant business. Then
Maybe before we jump too far into that, just one additional follow-up question. So you made the leap. You say, okay, I got to choose between teaching and doing the tennis, and love both of them, but they don't have the opportunity or the option to do both. So you decide, okay, I'm going to go the tennis route, enjoy the entrepreneurial aspect, be able to set a bit of my own schedule and do, or captain my direction. Now, what made you decide to exit that, or to sell off your ownership position there to the business partner?
So, at a point where the tennis shops grew to a nice critical mass, and it was supporting both of us fairly well, but they were small specialty shops, and we had 2 families, and it really, I had larger designs for the growth financially, and I didn't think I could achieve it with the resources that we had. And my partner was very capable. He enjoyed the full-time activity. Me, I always was looking for something else, or looking for a way to grow this, maybe even be acquired by a larger sporting goods company. And I was always looking for the next step, or whether that next step was growth of my company or growth of myself. And so my partner and I, while we have a good relationship to this day, 50 years plus later, we came to an agreement, because I was offered, as the movie says, an offer I couldn't refuse, to come work for another company. It was my mother was a bookkeeper for a very large jewelry manufacturer, and he had a son who was my age. He saw what I had done with my businesses. His son was walking into his business, kind of at, again, my age, kind of taking over the business. But the owner of the company kind of thought that he liked what I had done with my businesses, and thought that I could provide some direction, not only for his own business, but also for his son moving into the leadership role in terms of work progress and work ethic, whatever you want to call it. And it was an opportunity for me to learn different aspects. This was a manufacturing business, distribution. It involved a lot of travel, things that I certainly was not doing with my tennis shops or with some other opportunities that I had. So I jumped on it. And it was also a good salary, one that I had more money than I had made before up to that point. I was still in my 20s. Got myself a nice condo on the beach in Long Island, where I grew up. I moved back to my hometown from upstate New York. So it was all good. And then that got to the point also in my journey. And this is something that a pearl of wisdom, if you will, that I'll pass on to your audience. I did this for 2 years. I was very successful for the company and for myself. And as I mentioned earlier, my mother was the bookkeeper for this company. And Christmas bonus time came around, and I got a bonus, which was a very nice bonus. But my mother said, you know, Paul, you did a really good job in sales and in operations for the company this past couple of years. And because of a lot contributing because of your efforts and how the company grew financially, the owners were able to take a bonus of X amount of dollars, which was exponentially more than what I had received. And so I went into the owner of the company and I said, look, I really appreciate this opportunity. You know, I'm really enjoying it. Everything's really great. You know, but I kind of think that I'm worth a raise. And he said to me, never forget this. And I've used it many times over the years with the dozen or so businesses I've had and the employees I've brought on and the growth I hopefully allowed them to achieve in their own personal paths. He said to me, Paul, he said, you're absolutely right. You did a great job for this business. Our earnings are up. Everything is good. Customer acquisition is high. Everything is good. And he goes, but I will tell you this straight up. When you work for somebody, you will never earn what you think you're worth. But when you work for me, I'll make sure I pay you more than anybody else will. And so I took that to heart. And the next day I turned in my resignation and I quit. And I actually went to work for a competitor of his who made me a better offer that I couldn't refuse. And it gave me more freedom and more travel and a little bit less responsibilities of the things that I didn't like to do. And that really helped me in my journey, not only because of what he said, which I took to heart as I started hiring people in my own businesses, but it also really focused me on what I did best. I did not like a lot of the management aspects of that business, the hiring, the firing, the factory operations. I like the sales. I like getting out there, talking to customers, finding new customers, new markets for the company's products. It really helped me at a very early stage of my life. I was approaching 30 years old, where I was really pushing towards the sales and marketing. But of course, as an entrepreneur, you get pulled into situations where you have to wear all hats. I went into the restaurant business, did that for 12 years with a good friend, tennis player friend of mine, who we decided to become partners. He was in the food service area. He knew a lot about that aspect of the business. Me, I was in it for the buying a piece of real estate, renovating the building, helping with the vendors and with the customer aspects of the business. But I learned early on, I needed to wash dishes. I needed to tend bar. I needed to learn how to cook. I needed to do all the kinds of things so that I understood what the aspects of the business were. That doesn't mean that I was going to do those things 40, 50, 60 hours a week, like the people we hired to do that, because another saying I will put out to your audience. People ask me all the time, well, what's the definition of a good leader or a good CEO of a company? And my response is very simple. It's somebody who's smart enough to hire the best people for the jobs that are necessary, but wise enough to back off and let them do it. And so not to micromanage or anything like that, but still know enough that you know what talent is. You mentioned that I had a relationship with a Russian company that had some software in audio, video, communications, GPS, navigation systems. They were looking to find their high value audiences here in the United States. They found me. We entered into an agreement. I was a hired gun for them. Sales.
Just one question just on that. So I mean, you were Because you went, if I remember right, when we chatted a bit before, over a period of time, you went through a few different, jobs. You did the restaurant for a period of time. I think you also talked about telephone and data systems, and you found that, that while there are a lot of hats you have to do for your own business, you didn't like some of the ones like HR management, but you love the marketing and sales. Now, how did you get connected up with the Russian company? Because it seems like it's a bit of a pivot or a different avenue to take versus what some of the other industries you previously worked in.
Nothing is a straight line, and you're absolutely correct, Devin, that this wasn't either. So what happened was, after my restaurant, which was very successful, had that for 12 years, my partner and I had a little bit different plans of where we were going after 12 years. He was very content in our upstate New York area where we had the restaurant, and the growth we had there, and we kept expanding our restaurant there and the markets we served. But I wanted more. I also wanted to play tennis more. My parents moved from New York down, they retired and moved down to Florida. I decided to follow them, and I sold out my interest in my restaurant to my partner. And the two of us actually, I sold my interest to him, and then I opened a restaurant just like the one in New York and Florida, sharing the entrepreneurial pitfalls and journey with your audience. What I made in 12 years in New York, I lost in 1 year in Florida. So that was what I call a learning experience. I didn't research the market very well. I just knew that I had a successful operation in New York, and I was going to try to duplicate it in Florida. Worst thing I won't say the worst thing I ever did, because it was a very good learning experience. But what happened was, after I did that, I now had to pick myself up and say, okay, what's Paul going to do now when he grows up? And so I went back to my math roots, and a friend of mine had a problem that needed solving. Again, this should be at the absolute foundation of any entrepreneurial journey. You may have a great idea for a product, a service, something that you think you can offer, but if it doesn't solve a problem, you're probably wasting your time. You got to have something that fits a need that people have or business has. So what I did was, I had a friend who was in the financial sector, and Florida had passed a law in 1990 called the non-solicitation law, which is now a federal law. And he asked me, because he knew my math background and some computer background I had, he said, Paul, is there a solution? My stockbrokers are on the phone all day long calling people. And when they call somebody who says they don't want to be called, I need a system to get that number off. And so at the time in the 90s, database systems and phone systems did not communicate with one another. AT&T, one of the big players at the time, and Nortel, those are two big phone manufacturers. And then there was Novell, which was the database manufacturer and developer at the time, before Microsoft took over with its NT network and networking, and way before Cisco and a lot of the companies that you hear about today, like Oracle and these kind of companies.
And so you had your friend that had that need. There's certainly a lot of other companies out there. So how did that interplay with or connect you up with the Russian technology?
So I grew that company. We started a company. I got into software development. Once again, like I said just a moment ago, hiring somebody better than I was. I know enough about programming that I won't be thrown out of a room with engineers, but I not enough to actually produce something and to develop an app. So I hired people to do that. We developed a solution that actually provided, we had the first software application that did screen pop on a database from a phone call coming in using the phone number. That was it was the first application, excuse me. It was the first application ever created that took a caller ID and then pulled a database record out of a CRM or a database, and very similar to how Domino's now knows, based on your phone number, what credit card you used, what pizza you ordered the past, pop up a map for directions to your home and all that kind of stuff that all starts with the phone call. So we developed an app that did that. It was picked up by AT&T and some other phone manufacturers, and I scaled that company to the point that it exited. When it exited, I now developed the reputation of being somewhat of a communications consultant in the telemarketing and telephone and communications world. I got hired by a company in Atlanta, once again, leaving my own company, was given an offer I couldn't refuse. I joined a company in Atlanta. It was a company that
Maybe
just
just to dive in, just because, or so that we can make sure to get to where you're at a bit today. So you worked with a company in Atlanta, and then at some point, as that your company continued to grow in the U.S., you ended up ended up retiring, or I think you talked about or kind of stepped back for a bit. Now, talk a little bit, because you have the current business today, which is wall printing, which again is, as you mentioned, no journey is a straight line. But so you grew the other business for a while, got into the technology and the phone services, decided to take a step back or maybe retirement for a bit. Now, how did you get into wall printing, or what was the transition?
I'll try to fast forward this to that point. So when I sold my software company, that was one of my retirement phases. Then I was brought back into it by another technology company. This technology company, which was a US-based company in Atlanta, had a competitor, which was a Russian company. We became frenemies, going to the same trade shows, selling the same products to different companies, but I was landing business much more than they were, even though their technology was significantly superior to the company that I worked for. So one night, over a couple of vodkas, they flat out asked me, they said, "Paul, what's the story? Our technology we know is much better than yours, but yet you're landing deals. You sold to Motorola, you sold to these companies, and we didn't." And I said, "Well, it's very simple. You're Russian and I'm not." Now, that's no disrespect to Russians or anybody with any foreign heritage. It's just a fact that American companies prefer to work with somebody who kind of speaks their language, literally. And the Russian dialect was not conducive to the types of software developer personalities that I was faced with. Well, anyway, they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I came and worked for them for about 12 years also. It was a very successful relationship. And I started getting a reputation for helping companies outside of the US represent their products to the US audience. So when China was coming up in the world stage in technology and communications, Russia was doing more business with them. I brought this company to as far as I could with the customers I engaged. So I retired once again. And then a company in Israel found me with a media board that they wanted to market into the United States. That product was horrible, and I told them flat out that it wasn't anything I was interested in. But then an Austrian baby bottle manufacturer approached me and asked me to help them with marketing and finding their audience of mothers and retail stores and distribution in the United States.
Maybe just because we're getting towards the end of the podcast, we still haven't reached the end of your journey. So even
let's
fast
move forward
quicker to how maybe help us understand how that got to where you're at today.
So after 4 or 5 of these other products and services that I represented successfully in helping these companies achieve their markets in the United States, vendors, strategic partners, exit strategies, whatever, I was retired once again, sitting at my computer at home, as I often do, and search for things. I think of myself as a consumer who notices things that are fairly mainstream. And I got approached by a company that had a vertical printing machine, which I had never seen before. It was a German company, very nice product. I reached out to learn more about it, could not work a deal with them that I could be an owner, equity participant in the company. They wanted me, like all the other companies, to be a hired gun for them. In this stage of retirement, I vowed if I was ever going to do something like this again, I was going to do it with a product that I owned, not work for somebody. And so I showed my wife the product, or I actually called her into my office. Generally, she doesn't come in and see what I'm looking at. Instead, she goes and cuts up my credit cards and hides my bank account because she thinks I'm going to invest in something again. And so this time she was all in, and it was a vertical printing machine. I did my homework. I found out that there are only 5 companies in the world that made such a machine. None of them were in North America to any great extent. 0 were in the United States and South America. And I found out it's because the product was a product with advanced technology that needed support, training, inks supplied locally, a lot of things that allowed these companies, the 5 that did do this, 1 German company, 2 Chinese companies, an Indian and an Australian company, that they didn't want to come across the pond, so to speak, to North America to set up shop. I enjoy taking risks. I thought that this was a really cool product, and I did that. So I engaged all 5 companies, found the one that I felt was the best, that was the most feature rich, and the one that would give me the agreement. I co-own some patents with the Chinese manufacturer we selected. We manufacture our own inks here in the United States and other parts of the machine, some of the computer parts and components that are American made. And we have base in Wilmington, North Carolina now. We've been in business for 2 years. Again, based on the time we have, I won't tell you the foolishness of maybe starting a business with a product that nobody's ever seen or heard about at the time that COVID came around, because I did launch my company in December of 2019, and in January 2020, the world stopped. But the good news was I was all in financially in this venture, and I invested 8 months of time, talent, and my treasure in terms of building the company, finding out who the customers would be for a vertical printing machine. And we decided to put people in business in their own entrepreneurial journeys and give them, this is not a franchise, it is a business that people can create their own business or use it as part of an existing business. If they're in general contracting, painting, muralist, digital arts, graphics design, or they're a startup opportunity and they just want to enter into the world of putting beautiful wall art on any wall, indoors or outdoors. And now we also have developed a floor printer.
Oh, and I think that's awesome. In other words, it sounds like, so you entered in the market with, really not, if you were to take the normal timing, it probably wouldn't have been the best timing for in the sense that, things are shutting down with COVID and whatnot. And yet you say, okay, I'm all in, we're going to make this work. We have a good technology and a good relationship, and we have a unique or something unique to offer. And so now where does that kind of put you at today, or kind of where's the business at today?
Well, in the past 18 months, since COVID lightened up and people were starting to be able to travel and come to us in Wilmington, North Carolina at the wall printer to see the machines, talk to us, see what the capabilities and opportunity is all about, as well as Zoom calls, which have become very popular over the last couple of years. We've been able to engage with customers. We've gone from 0 to 75 markets that we've sold throughout Canada, the United States, and South America. I've got a great team of support, marketing, continuing to engage people. We've engaged probably about 3 to 5 million people through our social media efforts, which is only the tip of the iceberg. So we've got a long ways to go. The US itself has 300 million people, probably 295 million have never heard of a vertical printing machine yet. So we see the road ahead as being much greater than what we've already done.
And it sounds like, so if I were to maybe condense that just a bit, just to kind of maybe put a pin on it, so to speak, it sounds like you've been able to, even with the COVID and over 18 months, be able to adapt as far as your sales strategy, expand into a lot of markets, and make a pretty good entrance, which is all certainly exciting. So with that, now as we kind of reach to the present day of your journey, and as we wrap towards the end of the podcast episode, I always have 2 questions I ask at the end of each episode. So we'll jump to those now. The first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made? And what did you learn from it?
Well, probably the transition from my New York restaurant success in New York to Florida, where I didn't do a proper market research, didn't have the proper funding, and I just did it more on impulse than anything else, without a lot of research. I learned that that's a big part of understanding the market. And again, like I said earlier in this conversation, having a solution to a problem. Having another restaurant in Florida at the time in the place where I was, it wasn't really such a unique, even though there were always places for good eateries, it wasn't the best decision I ever made.
No, I think that's a good takeaway. And I think that, sometimes we, I don't know, trick ourselves, but we start to believe, hey, we've got this figured out, and we can take the same thing that we figured out in one area and replicate it to another. And sometimes it works great, and it absolutely is an opportunity. But other times we tend to shy away from or not account for the differences, the variations, and the causes of success in one place versus another. So I think that both is an easy mistake to make, but also a good one to learn from. Second question I always ask is, if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what'd be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Well, just do what your passion drives you to do. The first bit of advice, of course, is like I've said, make sure that you're actually entering into a path that is going to provide a solution to a problem. That's the first thing. Second thing is, make sure that you have the time, talent, and treasure, as I call it, to enter that journey. And then just engage with the best people that you can to make sure that what you're doing resonates, not only with other people who use values you respect, but also with the market you're looking to approach.
Well, I think that's definitely some great takeaways and great piece of advice. So Well, as we wrap up the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, and find out more?
Well, certainly you can go to our website, which is thewallprinter.com with a THE in the front, thewallprinter.com. There's a contact form there. It'll go into my inbox as well as our sales teams. So you can get information about specifically the wall printer. I do a lot of give back. I am a mentor at the UNCW, which is the University of North Carolina in Wilmington, and their Cameron School of Business. I do a lot of guest lecturing on sales and marketing. I'm always happy to engage, happy to talk to people about what they're looking to do. If I can be of any help, I am. The best way to do that is to connect with me on LinkedIn. This is not an advertisement for LinkedIn, but it's a great professional network. Unlike Facebook and other social media outlets, LinkedIn is or should be reserved for people who want to make connections of like-minded people in their own fields of expertise or areas that you're wishing to explore. So if you want to go to LinkedIn and just search Paul Barron, I'm sure you'll find me, and feel free to connect with me.
All right. Well, definitely several great ways to connect, and definitely encourage people to check out the wall printer and support a great business. So with that, as we wrap up the episode, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been it's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to be guests on the podcast, we'd love to have you. So just go to inventiveguest.com and apply to be on the show. Couple more things as a listener, make sure to click subscribe, share, leave us a review. So we want to make sure that everyone finds out about all these awesome journeys. And last but not least, if you ever need help with your patents or trademarks or anything else with your startup or your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Well, thank you again, Paul, for coming on the podcast. It's been a pleasure, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you, Devin. I enjoyed the conversation. Sorry I didn't get a chance to ask you a couple of IP questions. All right.
It's all right.